Los Angeles, November 24th, 2021, 9:15 p.m. Thanksgiving Eve in Los Angeles is a strange mix of chaos and calm. The city doesn't stop, even for the holidays, but there's a certain softness in the air. I was alone in my apartment in Westwood, nursing a cold cup of chamomile tea while staring at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen. My work report was due the next morning, but my focus had scattered to the wind hours ago. Stephanie, my daughter, had texted earlier. She was cooking with Trevor, her husband, for their first Thanksgiving as a married couple. She sounded happy. No, she was happy. I had ruined my marriage long ago, but at least I'd done something right with Stephanie. The knock at the door startled me. I frowned, glancing at my phone. No one had called or texted to say they were coming by. Who is it? I asked cautiously, walking toward the door. It's me, came the muffled reply. Trevor. I opened the door to find him standing there, his leather jacket barely shielding him from the unseasonably cold night. He had that slightly disheveled look Stephanie loved. Dark hair, perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. But tonight, there was an edge to him. Forgot my wallet here last week, he said, his voice neutral, but his eyes, they held something else. I stepped aside to let him in. Sure, come on in. He walked past me, his boots thudding against the hardwood floor. The air seemed to shift as he moved, a tension creeping in that hadn't been there before. Where did you leave it? I asked. In the kitchen, I think. We both walked into the small, dimly lit kitchen. I motioned toward the counter. Check there. I didn't see it, but you're welcome to. I found it, he interrupted, picking up the wallet that had been half hidden under a pile of mail. He didn't leave right away, though. Instead, he leaned against the counter, flipping the wallet open and closed, his eyes fixed on me. What's wrong? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He hesitated, and then said, Nothing. Just. He paused, running a hand through his hair. Stephanie told me you'd be spending Thanksgiving alone. I shrugged, unsure where he was going with this. I've got work. It's not a big deal. Doesn't seem right, he said softly. Trevor, I appreciate the concern, but it's not just concern, he interrupted, stepping closer. I've been thinking about you. My breath caught. You're married to my daughter, I said, my voice firm. And yet, here I am. The table stood between us, but it might as well have been a thread. He stared at me, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that was almost unbearable. This is ridiculous, I muttered, turning away. Ridiculous? You felt it too, he said, his voice low and rough. Trevor, stop. I warned, but he didn't. He rounded the table in 2 quick steps, closing the space between us. His hand brushed my arm, and I froze. I can't hide it anymore, he whispered. I've been fighting it, but Trevor, I snapped, but my voice betrayed me. And then he kissed me. The moment of impact, the kiss wasn't tender. It was desperate, electric. My mind screamed at me to pull away, to shove him back, but my body betrayed me. I responded, my hands gripping his jacket as if to anchor myself. When we broke apart, both of us breathing hard, the reality crashed down like a tidal wave. Oh my God, I whispered. Trevor opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the sound of the front door slamming shut echoed through the apartment. We turned simultaneously, and there she was. Stephanie stood in the doorway, her arms filled with grocery bags. Slowly, the bags slipped from her grip, hitting the floor with a thud. A can of cranberry sauce rolled out, stopping at Trevor's feet. Stephanie, I started, stepping toward her. Don't, she said sharply, her voice trembling. Her eyes darted between Trevor and me, tears already brimming. How could you? How could you both? Stephanie, it's not. Trevor began, but she cut him off. Not what it looks like? She spat, her voice rising. I saw it. I saw it. My words faltered. What could I possibly say? Stephanie's gaze turned to me, and the raw betrayal in her eyes was like a knife to the gut. "You were supposed to be my mother," she said, her voice breaking. "You?" She choked on her words, shaking her head. "Let me explain," I begged, reaching for her, but she recoiled as if I were poison. "No, I don't want to hear it. Either of you." She turned to Trevor. "Get out." "Steph," he said softly, but she pointed to the door. "Get out." Trevor hesitated, glancing at me, then back at her, before finally leaving. The door slammed behind him and we were alone. The silence was suffocating. "I don't even know who you are anymore," Stephanie said finally, her voice hollow. "Stephanie, please," I pleaded. "It was a mistake." "A mistake?" she interrupted, laughing bitterly. "No, Mom. A mistake is burning the turkey. What you both did, is a betrayal. Of everything." She turned and left before I could say another word. The fallout the next day, Thanksgiving passed without a single call or text from Stephanie. I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the untouched plate of food I had prepared out of habit. Trevor's silence was deafening too. 2 weeks later, he vanished. No word to Stephanie, no explanation. She moved out of their shared apartment and stopped returning my calls. I thought the worst was over. I thought I could piece my life back together somehow. But then, in January, the letter arrived. It was tucked neatly into my mailbox, addressed to me in handwriting I recognized immediately. Trevor. The words inside chilled me to the core. I didn't leave because of what happened. I left because Stephanie has secrets too. She's not who you think she is, and you deserve to know the truth. The words reverberated in my mind like an echo in a canyon. Secrets? What secrets? Little did I know, the betrayal I had caused was just the tip of the iceberg. The truths waiting to be uncovered would unravel everything I thought I knew. Not just about Stephanie, but about myself. Los Angeles, January 15th, 2022, 8:45 p.m. The envelope sat on my coffee table like a coiled snake. Trevor's letter had arrived a week ago, but I hadn't been able to bring myself to read it again. Every time I caught a glimpse of his handwriting, a mix of fear and curiosity churned in my stomach. What secrets could Stephanie possibly have? The sound of my phone vibrating broke the silence. I grabbed it, hopeful for a moment, but it wasn't Stephanie. It was my best friend, Claire. "Have you heard from her yet?" Claire asked. "No," I admitted, sinking into the couch. "She's completely cut me off. I can't blame her." "You need to give her time," Claire said gently. "But, are you okay? You've been avoiding me too." I hesitated, then confessed. "Trevor left me a letter. It said Stephanie has been hiding something." "What kind of something?" Claire asked, her voice sharpening. "I don't know yet." "Well," Claire said after a pause, "if there's something you need to find out, sitting around isn't going to help." Claire was right, as usual. After hanging up, I stared at the letter one more time. Trevor's words replayed in my mind. Stephanie has secrets too. I grabbed my laptop and started digging. The discovery at first, my search yielded nothing. Stephanie's social media was spotless. Her emails and text chains, those I still had access to, were uneventful. But then I remembered the name from a text chain I'd found weeks earlier. Jordan's Vet. I typed the number into a reverse lookup site. The result was instant. The number belonged to a man named Gabriel Mills. I froze. Gabriel Mills. The name felt familiar, but it took me a moment to place it. Gabriel had been Stephanie's high school boyfriend, the one who had broken her heart just before prom. She had cried for weeks, swearing she'd never forgive him for what he'd done. Why was she in contact with him now? I dug deeper, pulling up everything I could find about him online. His life appeared uneventful, until I stumbled upon an old mugshot buried in an archived news article. Gabriel had been arrested a decade ago for fraud. A pit formed in my stomach. Stephanie was a stickler for honesty, almost to a fault. If she was communicating with someone like Gabriel, it couldn't be innocent. I knew I had to confront her, but she wasn't answering my calls. Desperation took over. I texted her, we need to talk. It's urgent. Hours passed without a reply. At midnight, I drove to her apartment. The confrontation, the building was dark when I arrived, but I could see a light on in Stephanie's unit. I knocked on the door, and to my surprise, it opened almost immediately. Stephanie stood there, her expression hard. What are you doing here? Stephanie, I need to talk to you, I said, stepping inside before she could stop me. You can't just show up uninvited, she snapped, crossing her arms. I wouldn't if you answered your phone, I shot back. Why didn't you tell me you're still in contact with Gabriel Mills? Her face went pale. How do you know about Gabriel? I found his number in your texts, I admitted. And then I looked him up. Stephanie, why are you talking to him? What's going on? She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the kitchen as if she were considering an escape route. I don't owe you an explanation, she said finally, her voice trembling. Maybe not, I replied, my voice softening. But if something's wrong, I want to help you. For a moment, she looked like she might tell me. But then her phone buzzed on the counter, and her entire demeanor changed. She snatched it up, glancing at the screen, and then shoved it into her pocket. Who was that? I asked. No one. Stephanie. I said it's none of your business, she snapped, her voice breaking. Why can't you just leave me alone? Before I could respond, the door behind me swung open, and a man stepped in. My heart stopped. It was Gabriel. The intruder. Gabriel froze when he saw me. Then, a slow smirk spread across his face. Well, this is awkward, he drawled. Who the hell are you? I demanded, even though I already knew. Mom, please just go, Stephanie said, her voice pleading now. No, I said, standing my ground. Not until I know what's going on. Gabriel stepped forward, his tone dripping with mockery. Stephanie didn't tell me we'd have company. I'm Gabriel, by the way. I glared at him. I know who you are. What are you doing here? That's a long story, he said casually, draping an arm over Stephanie's shoulder. She flinched but didn't pull away. Stephanie, what's happening? I asked again, my voice cracking. Gabriel's smirk grew. I think it's time for you to leave, ma'am. I'm not going anywhere, I snapped. Stephanie finally broke. Mom, please, just leave. I'll explain everything later. No, you'll explain it now, I said firmly. The tension in the room was suffocating. Gabriel's expression darkened, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of fear. Let her go, Steph, he said coldly. She doesn't need to know anything. Gabriel, stop, Stephanie said, her voice trembling. Or what? He shot back, his eyes narrowing. I stepped closer to my daughter, my heart racing. Stephanie, come with me. Now. Gabriel moved to block the door. And then Stephanie said something I'll never forget. I can't. I owe him. The shocking revelation, the words hung in the air like smoke. Owe him? For what? I demanded. Stephanie's eyes filled with tears. Mom, I borrowed money from Gabriel. A lot of money. He's helping me. Helping you. I spat. This man is a criminal. Gabriel laughed. A cold, humorless sound. Careful what you say, lady. Stephanie grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the door. Just go, please. I'll handle this. No, I'm not leaving you here with him, I said, but Gabriel stepped closer, his presence menacing. You should listen to her, he said softly. This is between Stephanie and me. I wanted to fight, to scream, but the look on Stephanie's face stopped me. She was terrified. Against every instinct, I left the apartment. But as I drove home, one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let this go. This was far from over. Los Angeles, January 20th, 2022. 11:30 a.m. I couldn't sleep after the confrontation. Gabriel's smug face haunted me, and Stephanie's words replayed in my head. I owe him. What could she possibly owe him that would make her tolerate his presence? And how long had this been going on? The questions drove me to action. If Stephanie wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. That morning, I began my search with a renewed determination. I started by checking court records, hoping Gabriel's criminal past would provide clues. Sure enough, his name popped up in multiple cases. Fraud, extortion, and even a rumored involvement in a Ponzi scheme. My heart sank. Whatever Stephanie had gotten herself into, it wasn't good. A mysterious paper trail later that day, I decided to dig through my old records. Stephanie had asked me for money 6 months earlier, claiming it was for home repairs. I transferred her $5,000 without a second thought. But as I combed through my financial statements, I noticed another transfer, this one for $20,000. Made around the same time, but not to Stephanie. It was to a company I didn't recognize, Mills Financial Solutions. I sat back, my mind racing. Gabriel's last name was Mills. Was this his company? I called my bank, pretending I was confused about the transaction. The representative confirmed it was a payment I had authorized online. I knew I hadn't made the transfer, which meant someone had used my account. Someone like Stephanie. My stomach turned. Had my own daughter stolen from me? A visit to the past that afternoon, I decided to track down someone who might have answers. Gabriel's arrest record listed an old address in Pasadena. The place was a shabby duplex with peeling paint, but a woman in her late 50s answered the door when I knocked. "Can I help you?" she asked warily. "I'm looking for information about Gabriel Mills," I said, trying to sound neutral. Her face hardened. "Why are you asking about him?" "It's complicated," I admitted. "He's involved with my daughter, and I need to know what he's capable of." She sighed, stepping back to let me in. The living room was cluttered but clean, filled with mismatched furniture and framed photos. "I'm his sister Lorraine," she said, sitting on the edge of an old recliner. "And if he's involved with your daughter, you need to be careful. Gabriel's dangerous." My chest tightened. "Dangerous how?" "He preys on people," Lorraine said bitterly. "Makes them think he's helping, but it's always a lie. He gets them in debt, and once they can't pay, well, let's just say he doesn't ask nicely." "What does he do?" I pressed. She hesitated before answering. "He blackmails them, sometimes worse. And he always makes sure they feel like they don't have a choice." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought of Stephanie's terrified expression, her trembling voice when she said, "I owe him. Do you know anything about Mills Financial Solutions?" I asked. Lorraine's eyes widened. "That's one of his shell companies. He uses it to launder money and run his scams." I felt sick. Stephanie wasn't just in over her head. She was trapped. The discovery back at home, I scoured through every document I could find about Mills Financial Solutions. Most of it was a dead end, fake addresses, no real records. But then I found something. An employee directory on a cached version of an old website. Stephanie's name was listed. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. She wasn't just a victim. She had worked for Gabriel. I called her again, but as expected, she didn't answer. This time I left a voicemail. "Stephanie, I know you worked for Mills Financial. I know you're in trouble. Please let me help you. Call me back." Hours passed with no response. That night, I sat by my window, watching the city lights blur through my tears. For the first time, I felt truly powerless. The midnight revelation around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the park on Sunset and Gower. Midnight. Don't tell anyone." I knew it had to be Stephanie. I grabbed my coat and rushed out the door. The park was nearly deserted, save for a homeless man sleeping on a bench. Stephanie stood near the fountain, her hood pulled up, her face pale. "Stephanie," I said, approaching her cautiously. "Mom, you shouldn't have come," she said, her voice trembling. "I had to," I replied. "You're in trouble. I know about Gabriel. I know about Mills Financial." Her eyes widened. "You don't understand. He'll hurt you if he finds out you're digging into this." "I don't care," I said firmly. You're my daughter, and I'm not going to let him ruin your life. Tears spilled down her cheeks. It's too late. I owe him $100,000. I borrowed it to cover Trevor's gambling debts, but now I can't pay it back. Trevor, I repeated, stunned. She nodded. He was in deep with some dangerous people. Gabriel offered to help, but it was a trap. He's been holding it over my head ever since. My mind reeled. Trevor, the perfect son-in-law, had dragged my daughter into this mess. We'll figure it out, I promised, pulling her into a hug. No, she said, pulling away. Gabriel won't let me go. And if you keep pushing, he'll come after you too. I'm not afraid of him, I said. You should be, came a voice from behind me. I spun around to see Gabriel stepping out of the shadows, a cruel smile on his face. Well, he said, his tone mocking. A mother-daughter reunion. How touching. Stay away from her, I said, my voice shaking with rage. Gabriel chuckled. You don't get it, do you? This isn't a game you can win. But as he stepped closer, I noticed something in Stephanie's hand. Her phone, recording everything he said. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Los Angeles, January 20th, 2022, 12:10 a.m. The night air felt like ice against my skin as Gabriel stepped closer, his smirk cutting through the darkness like a blade. Stephanie's hand trembled as she held her phone behind her back, the screen still faintly glowing. I silently willed her to keep steady, to capture every word this man uttered. You're making a mistake, Gabriel said, his voice dangerously low. Both of you. No. I shot back, keeping my voice firm despite my pounding heart. The mistake was thinking you could bully my daughter into silence. Gabriel's eyes flicked to Stephanie, his smirk fading. You told her. She didn't have to, I said. You left a trail. His laugh was cold and humorless. You think you're smart? You think a recording is going to stop me? I own people like you, people who think they can fight back. I stepped forward, my anger boiling over. You don't own her. You don't own anyone. This ends now. But Gabriel wasn't fazed. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You think this is the worst I can do? I know things about Stephanie, things that will destroy her. Stephanie flinched, and I saw the fear flash in her eyes. What are you talking about? I demanded, but Gabriel ignored me, focusing entirely on her. Tell her, he said, his tone almost mocking. Go on, Steph. Tell mommy your dirty little secret. Stephanie's face crumpled, and tears spilled down her cheeks. Please, Gabriel. Don't what? He interrupted. Don't tell her about the accounts you helped me set up, or about the money we laundered together, or maybe about the other favors you did to pay down Trevor's debts. I froze, the words hitting me like a freight train. Stephanie, is that true? She didn't answer. She just looked at me with a mix of shame and desperation. A desperate escape. Gabriel chuckled again, but this time, the sound was cut short by the faint sound of sirens in the distance. His head whipped around, and I caught the flicker of panic in his expression. You called the cops? He hissed. I didn't, I said, realizing too late what was happening. It was me, Stephanie whispered, holding up her phone. I texted them as soon as you showed up. Gabriel's eyes narrowed, his calm facade crumbling. You stupid. Before he could finish, the sirens grew louder, and the unmistakable red and blue lights of a patrol car flashed at the edge of the park. Gabriel turned and bolted into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. Stephanie, are you okay? I asked, grabbing her shoulders. She nodded, but her whole body was shaking. I didn't know what else to do. You did the right thing, I said, pulling her into a hug. The aftermath. The police arrived minutes later. Stephanie handed over her phone, the recording still intact, and explained as much as she could without incriminating herself. I could see the struggle in her eyes as she carefully avoided mentioning her involvement in Gabriel's schemes. The officers took notes, but their expressions were grim. "If Gabriel Mills is involved, this isn't going to be easy," one of them said. "He's slippery. We'll do what we can, but don't expect immediate results." As they left, Stephanie and I sat on the bench near the fountain, the adrenaline slowly wearing off. "Mom," she said finally, her voice small, "I'm sorry for everything." "Stephanie," I said, my voice trembling, "I need to know the truth. All of it. No more lies, no more half-truths. What did Gabriel mean about the accounts? About the money?" She hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. "It started small," she began. "When Trevor's debts got out of control, Gabriel offered to help. He said he'd cover the payments if I worked for him. At first, it was just bookkeeping, but then he started asking me to set up fake accounts, transfer funds, hide transactions. I didn't know how bad it was until it was too late." "And the other favors?" I asked carefully. Stephanie's face crumpled again. He threatened to hurt Trevor if I didn't do what he asked. I didn't have a choice." My chest tightened. "What kind of things, Stephanie?" She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. A plan takes shape. The drive home was silent, tension hanging heavy in the air. I couldn't stop thinking about Gabriel's threats and what he might do next. Stephanie needed protection, but the police weren't going to act fast enough. As we pulled into the driveway, I turned to her. "We're going to fix this," I said firmly. "How?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "By outsmarting him," I said. "If Gabriel has dirt on you, then we need to find dirt on him. Enough to make sure he can't hurt you or anyone else ever again." Stephanie looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear. "What if we can't?" "We will," I promised. Setting the trap over the next few days, I threw myself into the plan. With Claire's help, I began gathering every piece of evidence I could find against Gabriel. Lorraine provided more details about his past scams, and Stephanie reluctantly handed over access to her old accounts, which revealed a treasure trove of incriminating data. But it wasn't enough. Gabriel was careful, always operating through intermediaries and fake identities. We needed something bigger, something that would tie him directly to his crimes. Then Stephanie had an idea. "He's planning a deal next week," she said, her voice shaking. "A big one. I overheard him talking about it. If we can get proof, it might be enough to take him down." "It's risky," I said. "He'll be watching you." "I know," she said, her determination surprising me. "But it's our best shot." As the pieces fell into place, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something dangerous. Gabriel wouldn't go down without a fight, and if we weren't careful, we'd be the ones to pay the price. Los Angeles, January 27th, 2022, 10 p.m. The warehouse on the outskirts of Los Angeles was the perfect setting for a deal like this. Remote, industrial, and cloaked in shadow. Stephanie had given me the details of Gabriel's big transaction, a high-stakes money laundering operation that would tie him directly to his network of crimes. She and I had spent the week meticulously planning. We coordinated with the police, providing them with everything we had uncovered. But the police couldn't act without hard evidence, which meant Stephanie had to be there. She had insisted, despite my protests. "This is my mess, Mom," she'd said. "I have to see it through." Now, as I watched her slip into the warehouse from my hidden vantage point in the parking lot, my heart raced. The police were staged nearby, waiting for my signal. Everything hinged on Stephanie getting the proof we needed and getting out alive. Inside the lion's den, Stephanie stepped into the cavernous space, her breath fogging in the cool air. Gabriel was there, surrounded by two other men who looked every bit as dangerous as he did. Stacks of cash and laptops were laid out on a table between them. "You're late," Gabriel said, his tone sharp. "I had to make sure no one was following me," Stephanie replied, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. Gabriel studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the table. "You know what to do." Stephanie approached the laptops, her hands trembling as she began accessing the accounts. Her phone, hidden in her jacket pocket, was recording everything. "What's the holdup?" one of Gabriel's men barked. "It's a lot of data," Stephanie said, stalling for time. "Hurry up," Gabriel snapped. The signal from my hiding spot. I could see the glow of the laptop screens through a broken window. Stephanie had told me she would signal when she had enough evidence. She'd run her hand through her hair, her nervous tell. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Then I saw it. She ran her hand through her hair. I pulled out my phone and texted the police. Go. The sound of sirens shattered the night, their piercing wails echoing through the warehouse district. "What the hell?" Gabriel growled, his head snapping toward the sound. Stephanie froze, but she quickly recovered. "I don't know." Gabriel's eyes narrowed, and suddenly, he reached for her jacket. Before she could stop him, he yanked it open and pulled out her phone. "You little—" He didn't finish. The warehouse doors burst open, and police flooded in, their guns drawn. "Everyone, hands up!" an officer shouted. Gabriel grabbed Stephanie, pulling her in front of him like a shield. "Stay back," he yelled. "I'll kill her." The police hesitated, their weapons trained on him. "Gabriel, let her go." I heard myself shout, stepping into the light. "Mom, no!" Stephanie cried. Gabriel's eyes flicked to me, his grip tightening on Stephanie. "You," he spat, "you're the one who put her up to this. You did this to yourself," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "There's nowhere to go. Let her go, and maybe they'll go easy on you." Gabriel laughed, a wild, desperate sound. "You think I'm afraid of prison? I've been through worse." But then something incredible happened. Stephanie, with a sudden burst of strength, stomped on his foot and twisted out of his grasp. She stumbled forward, and a police officer pulled her to safety. Gabriel made a run for it, but the police were faster. He was tackled to the ground and cuffed, his string of curses echoing through the warehouse. The aftermath, it was over. Gabriel was arrested, and the evidence Stephanie had gathered was more than enough to ensure he would face justice. His accomplices were taken into custody as well. Stephanie and I sat on the curb outside the warehouse, wrapped in the scratchy blankets the police had handed us. "Are you okay?" I asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She nodded, her eyes filled with exhaustion. "I think so. You were amazing in there," I said, my voice breaking. Stephanie managed a small smile. "I had a good coach." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. A new beginning. The next few months were a whirlwind. Stephanie cooperated with the police, testifying against Gabriel and providing insight into his operations. Her involvement in his crimes complicated things, but her willingness to come forward worked in her favor. She received a suspended sentence and mandatory community service. Trevor predictably disappeared. He left Stephanie a letter full of excuses and half-hearted apologies, but she didn't even read it. "I'm done with him," she told me one evening, her voice firm. As for me, rebuilding my relationship with Stephanie was slow but steady. We started small, weekly coffee dates, long walks, and endless conversations. For the first time, I felt like we were truly connected. One day, as we sat on a bench overlooking the ocean, Stephanie turned to me and said, "Thank you, Mom, for everything." Tears filled my eyes. "You're my daughter," I said. "There's nothing I wouldn't do for you." The road ahead wasn't easy, but we were walking it together, and that was enough.